Let's be honest, if you've been watching the news lately, it feels like the world is spinning out of control. You've got Russia invading Ukraine, you've got China making threats toward Taiwan. It's really easy to feel like everything we thought we knew is just falling apart. So, what on earth is actually going on? Today, we're going to dig into our source material, look behind those headlines, and try to make sense of it all.
All right, so here's our game plan. We're going to tackle this in 5 key chunks. First up, why the old system, the old rule book, seems to be collapsing. Then we'll look at how the West kind of lost its grip. After that, we'll see what's rising up to fill that power gap. Then we're going to zoom in on how this all hits home, looking at the economic squeeze in a country like Britain. And finally, we'll wrap up by exploring what could possibly come next in this chaotic new era.
So let's dive right into our first big idea, this notion that we're now living in a world without rules, all because a fundamental shared myth has completely shattered. Yeah, this question, I'm pretty sure it's something we've all asked ourselves lately, right? You get this feeling of whiplash from all the headlines. But here's the thing, our source material argues that these events, they aren't random at all. They're actually symptoms of a massive, deep-down shift in global power. Okay, so to really get what's happening now, we have to do a super quick history rewind. After World War II, you basically had 2 giants in the schoolyard, the US and the Soviet Union. But then, boom, 1991, the Soviet Union collapses. And suddenly, we're in what they call a unipolar moment. All that means is that one country, the United States, was the undisputed top dog. The problem, as our source points out, is that this entire system is now crumbling, and it's happening incredibly fast. Now, this gets to a really fascinating and, maybe a little controversial idea. The source calls things like international law a kind of shared myth. It sounds nice, right? But the argument is that it was never really about universal agreement. It was about the United States and its allies having the military and economic muscle to enforce their version of the rules. And now that that power is fading, we're shifting to a much more dangerous world where it's kind of every nation for itself. Okay, so if the old order is collapsing, the next logical question has to be, why, right? How did this happen? That brings us straight to our second section. How exactly did the West, the enforcer of that whole system, grow weak? So the crucial point here is what happened after that big Cold War victory. The source argues that with its great rival gone, the West lost its sense of purpose and, more importantly, its sense of danger. It just got comfortable, complacent. It took its eye off the ball. And check this out, these numbers really paint a picture. Europe has just 12% of the world's people, but it accounts for a whopping 60% of all global welfare spending. The source presents this as a key symptom, a continent that started looking inward, focusing on its own social programs, instead of outward, on maintaining its global strength. And if we zoom in on the UK, wow, the picture gets even more dramatic. According to the source, the country now spends up to twice as much just paying the interest on its national debt as it does on its entire military. Think about that for a second. That's a massive shift in priorities, and it shows where the money and the focus is really going. This weakness, of course, has some serious consequences. And that leads us right into Section 3, the rise of new superpowers and what that really means for the rest of us. A more violent and unstable world. This is just a core principle from the source. It's almost like a law of physics for geopolitics. When the central authority breaks down, when the cat's away, conflict is pretty much inevitable as other powers rush in to fill that void. And that makes the world a much more unpredictable and, frankly, dangerous place. And this is what we get as a result. Experts call it a multipolar world, which is just a fancy way of saying there isn't one single superpower calling all the shots anymore. But what does that actually feel like? Well, it means rivals like Russia and China feel emboldened to challenge the old way of doing things. It means more regional wars, countries scrambling to build up their armies again, and a global economy that's starting to break into different camps. And all of that just creates more political pressure back home. But look, this isn't just some abstract chess game between countries. This stuff has a real, tangible impact on people's lives. So let's bring it right down to the ground level in our 4th section and see how this global shift is being felt as a painful economic squeeze in a country like Britain. Here's a statistic that, wow, it really brings it home. The source says that, on average, the typical person in Britain is actually poorer today than they were back in 2006. Let that sink in for a second. The overall economy might have gotten a bit bigger, but for the average person, their slice of the pie has shrunk. That's a direct hit to quality of life. And this quote, this really gets to the heart of the how. How did this happen? Well, the argument is that to maintain all that social spending without a booming economy to pay for it, Western nations have been accumulating massive amounts of debt. It's exactly what the quote says, basically kicking the can down the road and borrowing from future generations who are going to be left with the bill.
So, given this pretty bleak picture we've just painted, the big question is, what can be done? Our final section takes a look at the difficult path forward that's proposed in our source material.
Now, the source doesn't just diagnose the problem, it actually proposes a pretty specific solution. It's a 5-step path to recovery for a country like Britain. First, make economic growth the absolute top priority. Second, get a handle on immigration to build social cohesion. Third, start seriously rebuilding military strength. Fourth, double down on the alliance with the US. And finally, number 5, tackle the demographic problem by encouraging a higher birth rate.
And that brings us to the final, crucial question this whole explainer leaves us with. If that old rules-based order is truly gone and the power that held it all together is fading, then a new set of rules will eventually emerge. History tells us that much is certain. The question for all of us, really, is who gets to write them this time?